Mero Memo with Matthew Dickinson from Dubbo Regional Council.
Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Mero Memo. On today's show, we're going to look into the exciting new funding announcement that's been made out there for Dubbo's Western Plains Zoo. We'll also be acknowledging some of Dubbo's finest citizens and also be taking a bit of a snapshot of some of the great new shows that will be coming up at the Regional Theatre next year. Good morning, Matt. How are you this morning?
I'm exhausted, actually. It's been a really busy week this week.
Another busy week, mate.
Well, it seems like there's always a busy week. It seems like there's so much happening. And one of the big things that I've really noticed since I've come back as mayor the second time around is it's the amalgamation, after the amalgamation. And I remember last time I was mayor, it was really busy around Dubbo City Council area. There were lots of things to do, lots of ribbons to cut, lots of events to go to. Yes. But now, of course, you add Wellington in, so that adds the events from there, which is great because there's lots of things happening in Wellington. It's all very exciting as well. But then on top of that, you add the travel in. So the roadworks between Dubbo and Wellington mean that it's really about a 40-minute trip now. So I'm down in Wellington, I'd probably say at least 3 times a week, sometimes 4 or 5 times a week. Yeah. So you add the extra events that are there, then you add the time for travel, and you go, there's a fair bit of extra time taken there. But this week, it seems to have happened, it just seems to be in events everywhere. So I was in Mudgee one day this week, I was in Bathurst another day this week, I was in Sydney another day this week. So it seems like it's all over the place. And after we record this, I'm looking forward to a little sleep, I think.
And wasn't it lovely also this morning to actually get back onto the old course down there at the park run?
It was fantastic.
To see that little low-level bridge finally open, folks. It's, if you want to go and check out that track again, it's all open to run around through that space again.
So I just thought I might address the conspiracy theorists out there,
Mark,
yes.
What's the latest conspiracy?
Well, I did hear this morning when I was at Park Run, the fact that the Shibble Bridge, which is another part of Track-a-Riley, is actually higher than the Tamworth Street Bridge. And so as I was walking past someone and they were chatting away, they said, they've opened up the Tamworth Street Bridge first because I know the mayor and the CEO do park run, so they wanted to get it open for them. And I just had a quick chat to the person talking about this, but the fact about the Shibble Bridge being higher is correct. So the Shibble Bridge is actually a little bit higher. In fact, the bridge is probably similar to the Tamworth Street Bridge, but then as you go on the western side of the Tamworth Street Bridge, it dips down, the path dips down there. So even though the bridge might be out of the water, if the water's still at a certain level, the entrance there is still underwater. So ultimately the Shibble Bridge comes out of the water and is able to be used before the Tamworth Street Bridge. There's a couple other things that are complications to throw in there, is that the Tamworth Street Bridge, the railings have to be let down manually. So they've got bolts on them. When water's rising, then our staff go down, take out the bolts, drop the railings. At the Shibble Bridge, it was a later design. We did that one. So they're actually designed with shear bolts. So the pressure of the water is enough to actually snap those bolts by design, and then they fold down. Now, that works well, except sometimes you might get a few logs coming along, and before they get enough pressure to snap, they might do a bit of damage to the railing. So we sometimes take a bit longer to get the Shibble Bridge back up and going. But it was a conscious effort this week to get the Tamworth Street Bridge back up and going for Park Run, not because the CEO and myself run in Park Run, and we'll count you in there as well. We might as well make you part of the conspiracy theory as well.
I'd like to say the fact that it improved my time, but unfortunately no.
But the reality is you've got a couple hundred people every Saturday doing Park Run, and they use the Tamworth Street Bridge when it's available. Obviously, they've had to use an alternative course, but that's a great usage of that asset. So why not get it open for Park Run? But also, just in general, when people are using Track-a-Riley, more people do use the Tamworth Street Bridge than the Shibble Bridge. So we're always going to open the Tamworth Street Bridge sooner, all things being equal, before the Shibble Bridge, because of the slight amount of damage that might be done at Shibble, because of the higher usage, not just because the CEO and the mayor happen to run at park runs.
Well, I'm glad you've answered that conspiracy, Matt. As always, you've done well. Now, on obviously a little bit more of a, let's just say, a bit more of a pressing issue, I'd suggest, because my park running performance, I must admit, I'd love to have seen him improve on that bridge there today. It was a lovely day to get back around it. But, Matt, during the week, there was a really impressive announcement made in regards to the Western Plains Zoo. So what's actually happened out there? There was $30 million announced this week, I think, in regards to the New South Wales state government on that.
Yeah, so $20 million from the state government, $10 million will come from the zoo.
Right.
They'll be building a whole new Serengeti visitor experience centre.
Sounds amazing.
And one of the things that Dubbo does really well is we have conferences out here. And there's a sweet spot for those conferences. If someone wants to have a conference of 500, 600, 700 people, it's probably bigger than most of our centres can handle. And it's probably not worth people going and building a conference centre of that size for the number of conferences around that might be of that size. But the real sweet spot for Dubbo seems to be maybe 100 to 300 people. We can handle those size conferences. We've got the accommodation. We've got the ability to really absorb those people into our community and benefit from them financially. So this Serengeti Visitor Experience Centre has got a 300-person conference centre, but it looks out across, this is a whole new area they built. The entrance will be from Camp Road. So the existing entrance...
that's on the eastern side, isn't it?
It's around the back.
Area. Yeah. Okay.
So you've got the entrance to Safari Lodge, which is past the normal entrance, but you'd keep going along that road and loop back around to Camp Road, and everything will then be entered. The Safari Lodge and the Serengeti Experience will all be entered from that entrance, and the main entrance will be just for people that are going to the main part of the zoo.
Is it going to connect up to the old safari sort of setup? Is that the way it's going to run?
All of that will then be connected together. Okay. And at this stage, the council were involved in the business case for this in terms of justifying the expense of spending this money from the state government, involved in the submission of this. So it's a partnership arrangement between Taronga Western Plains Zoo and Dubbo Regional Council, which is fantastic.
Excellent.
We're not putting in any money. We'll be the bankers, if you like. We'll take the money from the government. We'll basically make sure it's all done and spent properly. So we're an important partner in there. But just in terms of that tourism asset we have here in Dubbo, it's a fantastic asset now. 300,000 people a year, every year, visit the zoo. So let's say roughly 1,000 people, a little bit less than 1,000 people a day, every day, coming into our community to visit the zoo. From a tourism perspective, our job as the rest of the community, as Dubbo Regional Council, is to see how we can hold on to those people a bit longer.
Yes.
And you can just imagine if we could hold on to those people for one extra night by other tourism assets that we might have, we estimate that about $200 per night per person is what it gets injected into our economy.
Now, you're better at maths than me on that one. So
if I multiply that out, 300,000 people, get them here for one extra night, $200 a night, that's $60 million into our economy that we can drop in. And again, it's a challenge because people come for a holiday, they think, we'll go to the zoo. They might even stay, for example, in Mudgee at a winery and just come over to the zoo for a day. We've got to entice them with other things. We've got to make it so that people say, I can't possibly do that in a day, or they might be planning on a couple of days, and then they see other things that we've got, whether it be Wellington Caves or Old Dubbo Jail or the Royal Flying Doctor Visitor Experience Centre, or if we get things like e-scooters or paddle boats down the river, all sorts of different things, the longer we can keep them here, the more that does for our economy.
Well, I noticed too, with regards to this new Serengeti experience, that there's accommodation is coming into that. Is that part of it as well? Are they increasing the level of accommodation out there too? Because, as you say, it's all about trying to keep people here. So one of the great ways is to get them to stay overnight rather than simply just go to the zoo for the day. To actually get them to stay overnight there, then we can, obviously, these other things come into play too, don't they?
Absolutely right. And Safari, the whole accommodation area out there at Safari is a fantastic thing. And some of the accommodation providers in Dubbo were a bit worried when the zoo first announced that they were going to have accommodation at the zoo, because one of the things that used to be really important is people would stay at the zoo and then they'd stay at some motel overnight. But it adds to our tourism product rather than taking away from the accommodation providers. And what will often happen, and I've had friends of mine do exactly this, I've said, when you come to Dubbo, you've got to stay at Safari. Sure, stay at my place if you want, or stay at a motel because they might be here for 3 or 4 days. But at least one of the nights you've got to stay at Safari. And Safari is fairly expensive, but that's where people do. They don't. If they're staying in Dubbo for a week, they don't stay at Safari for a week. They'll stay at Safari for a night because it's all about the experience of staying there, the behind-the-scenes tour you get. That's all part of that fantastic experience. And so you might stay there one night, but that might actually add to the tourism for the other areas. But it's also about the different experiences, and this is what this Serengeti will be all about. There'll be new accommodation built as part of it, but the idea is that they're modelling this on places like Kruger National Park in South Africa.
Okay.
Now, it's not going to be as big as that. Kruger National Park, I think, is something like 55,000 square kilometres. And I've been there. I've been there with my wife to Kruger National Park, and it was a fantastic experience. And there's a few things that I found interesting. I mean, it's a long way to get there. I think from door to door from here in Dubbo, it was about 26 hours. So it's a long way to go, 14 hours up in the air. You've then got about a 5-hour drive, I think, from memory, from where we landed across to Kruger National Park. And then they've got accommodation, and they've got tours that go out in amongst the Serengeti. But the accommodation, and they probably do this a little bit to make it all part of the experience, but they say just make sure when you walk from the main accommodation area across to the main food area, you always ring a guard and bring one of the
just in case
attendants.
a lion decides to jump out at you or
well,
something?
leopards are apparently the big thing they talk about. They said
genuine.
That leopards, I don't know. This is the thing.
It's all part of another conspiracy theory.
Well, it could be part of that, making this part of the overall experience.
Oh, yes.
But they talked about the fact that leopards sometimes see people walking the short distance from their accommodation area to the main area.
Or something, do they? Or?
Well, they apparently grab the back of your neck and just snap the back of your neck, and they don't actually want to eat you. They just want to take you out of the picture.
That's morning play. Look, kids, there's your morning play. Go and have a crack at that.
That's right. So you made sure, when you hear this sort of story, you made sure that you always had an attendant with you, and they're carrying guns with them, of course, so they're ready for these leopards that are going to come and jump out.
Right.
Now, again, I don't know if it ever happens to someone.
So it's a good selling point anyway, isn't it?
Well, it's a good or a bad selling point. I'm not sure which.
I don't know if I'm encouraged by this or not.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing with this experience of building here in Dubbo. You'll get that similar sort of outlook without the fear of death built into part of the package.
We're not going to have leopards jumping out of people, are we?
No, that's obviously part of the plan, to not have leopards coming out.
We'll just throw that little story out there, though, maybe, just to encourage a few others.
Well, that's right. But maybe the whole idea of just being able to sit there in your conference centre. Imagine going to a conference where you're sitting there and it's basically like being out in the Serengeti. You're looking out across a watering hole and you've got the various animals.
Concentrated at a conference. You're looking at that, though.
Well, that might be part of it too.
What if you're a good keynote speaker to get that?
Yeah, so you're trying to take the concentration
That's
away.
Right.
So you've got the conference centre will be upstairs. Downstairs there'll be restaurants to handle those people at the conference. But we as residents of Dubbo or anywhere can obviously go out and just visit that restaurant as a normal restaurant as well. But again, if you had a special occasion meal that you wanted to have, then having it out there. And on one side will be that watering hole and the animals around there. On the other side will be a play area, like a water play area sort of thing, where you can play, the kids can play there without the risk of having some hippopotamus come and munch on you or something. So it sounds fantastic. New accommodation, which will be a higher level accommodation than VRA accommodation.
Oh, okay. So a bit more like a 4 or 5 star sort of style setup.
That type of thing, yeah.
Okay.
So it all looks fantastic. Now, that's all stage one. Stage two will be a hospitality training centre. And obviously that's incredibly important because it is hard for people to find employees in the hospitality industry in Dubbo at the moment. It's across the board. It's not just Dubbo. But having somewhere where they train, and again, you'll get trained to a very high standard, but what a great area to have for your training.
Magic.
So really exciting project. A lot of money injected in the Dubbo economy. I suspect they'll have this open and running by sometime, I'm going to estimate here, maybe late 2025.
Okay.
The plans are, I've seen the mock-up plan so far, but obviously more detailed plans to go. It's a really exciting project, but again, keeps building on what we've got there, keeps building on the zoo, keeps building on that fantastic asset that we've got. And I think when I was growing up, it was really a little bit about, oh yes, we've got the zoo, but we've got other stuff as well. Yes. So sometimes people were not wanting to be identified by just the zoo in Dubbo, but now I think people have realised, wow, it's such an important asset for us. Who cares if people know us for the zoo?
Absolutely.
At least you know them for something, so why not be the zoo? It's a fantastic thing, and it's all about conservation.
Yeah, can I just ask you just a quick question on that? I was listening there during the week, and Dougal Saunders made a comment, which I thought was a really profound one. He said that out here in our Dubbo region, we get about 1% of the overall tourist sort of population when they sort of move across to. If we could double that, so your figures are saying about 300,000 people go to the zoo. We could double that.
Sorry, go back one step. Was he talking about 1% of international tourism?
It might have been international tourism. Yeah. That could be the clarification point.
Yep.
And he's sort of basically saying if we could double that, think about the consequence of that in a positive way. The output in that a really positive way. So,
and I don't quite necessarily agree
those
with
figures
Dougal
true?
on that. So we do get about 1% of the international tourists come out here.
Yep.
The problem is that to try and increase that number, and again, what Dougal's saying is right, that if we can get more international tourists, fantastic. That's more money injected into our economy. But the number one postcode that visits Dubbo Zoo, Dubbo Taronga Western Plains Zoo, is Mossman.
Is that right?
So sometimes you look at where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are and look at how you can bolster one. You might sometimes focus on your weakness, or you might say, let's make our strength even stronger.
Yeah.
To increase that international tourism, you start to think, what do we need to do? What do we need to spend to increase that? Now, where do you advertise? Do you go to China? Do you go to New Zealand? What country do you go to try and increase the visitation to the zoo? How much advertising do you have to do to say, please come and visit Taronga Western Plains Zoo? And then you say, all that money we're going to spend on all that and the return we get on that investment, are we better off just going into Mossman and saying, come and visit the zoo, because we know we've got a good, strong foothold there already, so we're more likely to get more people. Now, it's not council zoo. We don't control the zoo. We don't run the zoo. These are all hypothetical questions that I'm putting out there. But if I own the zoo, I wouldn't be that concerned that we only had 1% international tourism. And I know some people would love to see more than that. That's fantastic. But you're looking at how you're getting the return on your investment. What's the best bang for your buck? And I actually believe the best bang for your buck, if I was running the zoo, would be to spend more money advertising in Sydney rather than in China, because I'm more likely to get a return on my investment out of Sydney than I am out of China, for example. So it's a tough one. Yes, I'd love to see more international tourism, don't get me wrong.
Yep.
But do I think it's a good investment to try and advertise, and then where do you advertise? That's the really challenging part. So, again, that might increase anyway.
Yep.
I did actually make the statement when we were making the launch or talking about the launch of this new project. I did actually say, having been to South Africa to visit Kruger, when we have this experience here, I look forward to welcoming visitors from South Africa to come here and look at what we've got here. Slightly tongue-in-cheek, because if you were in South Africa, you might go to Kruger. It's a bit easier for you. Yep. But I think we will have something that will be an experience that will be absolutely matched to something like Kruger National Park. So I look forward to lots of people visiting that.
I can't wait to see it. Now, Matt, I just want to raise a little bit of point of discussion here with you in regards to during the week. There's been some committees that have been made, or not actually during the week. In recent times, there's been some committees that have been made up about climate change and resilience committees. Now, I think there's a few of these sort of different groups out there. There's obviously committees that have been set up there specifically here in town for climate change conversations, and there's obviously other committees that have been set up. So how does it actually work with council in regards to this? So
there is one committee we've got at council called the Climate Change and Resilience Committee.
Oh, so it's one group there specifically?
That's one specific committee now, and we actually met during the week, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But what happened when this new council was formed, it was quite interesting. Back in the old Dubbo City Council days, again, going back to the old days when I was mayor before, we had this really great process, and it wasn't created by me. It was a process that had been developed over many years, many mayors and councillors before I came along, and we had lots of different committees and different groups that met. And I thought they were really positive ways to actually get some feedback from the community. And you'd normally meet, say, quarterly, for example, and they'd have a different focus. So it might be a focus on the sale yards. It might be a focus on the villages around Dubbo, various different ones. And so those committees had a focus, and the community members on those either had a passion or had some skills around that particular focus. For whatever reason, don't know why, the last council decided to disband all of those committees. So essentially, I think they were all gone, or maybe there were one or two that were left as a result of the amalgamation and then the new process of putting those committees together. Yep. When this council was formed, one of the things that I certainly talked about to my fellow councillors, and fellow councillors agreed, is that we really needed to form committees again because they were so important to get that community feedback. So we had a great workshop there one day where we basically had some butcher's paper on the wall. The staff wrote up.
I love it.
Yes, old school. The staff wrote up every committee that had ever existed over the last 20 years. Right. And then we went through and talked about those committees and did we need this committee? What's this committee going to do? We didn't want to create committees for the sake of creating committees. We wanted to make sure they would have a purpose in some way to deliver.
Prioritising the level of importance amongst the committee groups.
Yeah, I don't want to say level of importance because that might put some noses out of joint, but the relevance, but also the ability to do something. And that was the important part of it. It's no good creating a committee that says, let's reduce the taxation rate in Australia so we all earn more money. Well, that's great, but we don't actually control that. So what's the point of creating that committee? So it was really things where we could actually have a positive output. Yep. We end up with approximately 16 committees off the top of my head, and they all had different focus points, all had different things to do and different makeup of them. So, for example, there's a Wellington Town Committee. So, as you can imagine, there are people focused around the Wellington area that are sitting on that committee. And so people from Dubbo probably think, well, I don't need to be on that committee because the Wellington people have a say on things that they need for Wellington. So people in Wellington obviously put their hand up. There's another meeting of that committee next week, which I'll be along to. And so it's a really good process of getting all these different things together. The Climate Change and Resilience Committee meeting is actually quite a very robust committee. There are lots of people from the community. There are lots of people out there passionate about climate change, which is fantastic. Good. And what we've got to do as a council is I think we are very progressive, much more progressive than many other councils that I talk to around the state. And I would say absolutely more progressive than the last council in terms of the actions that we're taking and the things that we're doing. And having a committee like this where you've got lots of people who say we need to do things fast, we need to do things quicker is really good because that challenges the thought process for council, for councillors. Yes. And what you've got to do, one of the things I've always found when you want to make change, people are resistant to change naturally. And if I'm at point A and I need to get to point Z, then I might, in my mind, be absolutely satisfied that point Z is the answer. Let's go straight there. The problem when you do that is you lose people along the way. So to get to point Z, you've got to go to point B and C and D and through the alphabet to get to Z. And I think that's what we've got to balance up. So when we talk this committee, if we set this committee and said to this committee or set the agenda for this committee and said, you can control what council does, then this committee would only focus on climate change. And that'd be great for an incredibly important thing that we've got to do in our community. but we would lose most of the community along the way.
Yes,
so what we've got to do is take the
become other priority factors too, don't they?
Absolutely right. So take the enthusiasm, the passion, and the knowledge from this particular committee, balance it up with a whole range of other competing priorities, and make sure we're stepping along the path to get in the right direction. Yeah. And I think we'll get there. And so that's a really important part of the process. But as this committee meets and talks about their passion, every other committee that meets has the same passion and says, well, the only thing you should be focusing on is this particular aspect of council. So again, you've got to balance those up. And that's the real challenge for councillors. Yeah. We have all this information. We have all these competing interests. Yes. We've got to somehow work out a way that gives the best outcome overall for the long-term benefit of the community.
The good thing about the committees, though, isn't it? You've got the community voice, which there's an opportunity there because everyone's going to have their interests and their passion. So there's an opportunity there for people to go into the committees that they're very passionate about. It also, I suppose, gives them a common voice rather than having all little individual voices popping up and everyone's got their own suggestions. You have the committee form and it's a chance for everyone to express it in a very formal sort of structure, and that way you can then come up with a common outcome that you can then pass on to council as a community voice.
And you've said the important thing, they're passed on to council. So what happens with a committee like this is they don't make any decisions. What they would do is they'd make a recommendation.
Yes.
That recommendation would then go through typically to a standing committee meeting of council. The standing committee meetings happen.
Which I now know about because you explained it to me on the previous podcast. That's very good.
So the second Thursday of each month is our standing committee meetings. Yes. It won't happen that way in December because of Christmas, but normally second Thursday of each month. And that's when we discuss various things. So recommendations from various committees, community committees are discussed at those meetings. So that gives the community a chance because up to this stage, the committee is really the only one that knows about those things, those community committees. So then it goes to a standing committee. So then the wider community gets a chance to see that and, okay, that committee recommended that and that's a good idea or that's a terrible idea. And then we get more feedback from the community. Then 2 weeks later, it would go to a full council meeting, which is when the decision would be made. So the discussion that happens at the community committee meetings, the discussion happens at the standing committee meetings, and then finally get to a actual council meeting, and then that resolution is the action point. So we might have wonderful ideas at those two previous committee meetings, but if we don't go to the actual resolution of council, if we don't resolve to do something, then all it is idle chatter. Yeah. It's when we resolve to do something that action actually happens from that. So it's a good process to get those focused people in the community, then the wider community, get a chance to have feedback, get a chance to hear from the community, and then finally a resolution of council. And ultimately it's still councillors that make that decision, but hopefully we've had feedback along the way to get the right decision or as close as possible to the best decision every single time.
Great way to catch all the voices. Oh, Matt, this one's very, very close to my heart. Now, obviously last Sunday, the DRTCC, the Dubbo Regional Theatre and Convention Centre, now, they had their annual launch of what's coming up next year. Now, this is always a very exciting time. I love the launch because it's a great little snapshot of what's going to be coming up. Now, this has been such a wonderful initiative and adventure here for you in Dubbo. The new, well, it's not really new anymore, is it? It's been around now for quite a while, but our theatre. And I always love to sort of hear what's coming up. So, Matt, talk us through last Sunday, first of all, and then, if you can, give us a bit of a snapshot of maybe what's potentially going to be coming up next year.
So 17th of April 2010 was the first show at the
You're amazing
theatre.
On figures. How do you remember those things? I have no idea.
Well, it was Hotel California that played on that. And then the next day, 18th of April 2010, was Kamal. So if ever there was a doubt that this theatre was going to be a success, 2 sold-out shows the first 2 days and a talent like Kamal coming along was fantastic. So the season launch on last Sunday was a significant event because obviously, we have those season launches every year. Yeah. COVID had restricted those somewhat. But there's 2 opportunities at those season launches. One, you get a bit of a snapshot went for about an hour, through that session to see what's coming up next year. You get some little snippets, some live performances on stage and some videos that you see on the big screen to see what's coming up next year. But it's also the announcement about the subscription season. Yes. So we have subscribers in the season, so you can buy a subscription package. You get a certain number of tickets that you can buy to a certain number of shows throughout the year. You get some preferred seating, you get some discounts. So a few range of ideas or a few range of advantages there by being a subscriber. Yep. But it's really to get people excited about the next season. We want lots of people to come along and see various shows there. Also a good chance to talk about some of the sponsors and some of the people that support the theatre. A number of new sponsors were announced on the day, and there are also some returning sponsors. So just to run through those sponsors very quickly, it's great to acknowledge the support we get from some of these people. Centre Stage sponsor, new sponsor there, Mars Group.
Oh, good on
Top Hat sponsors, David Payne Constructions and Mari Astley. They've been involved before. Season launch sponsor was Kings Hall Jewellers. Chorus line sponsors, Dubbo Dental and Duncan McGuinness Vet. And curtain raiser sponsor was Bergen and Williams. They are important to the theatre and to the money that comes in for that theatre. But you're right, it has been there for, 12 years now, 12 and a half years.
Well, that's gone fast.
And I think the thing is that I have really enjoyed is that way back when, and I remember when I first stood for council, so 2003, I made the announcement, or made the decision in my mind, then made the announcement that I was going to stand for the council elections at the beginning of 2004. And back then, Dubbo Arts, very progressive group, a very active group in the community, was really pushing for a theatre, and they've been pushing for some time. But I remember they did an interview with all the candidates about the theatre and what their thoughts were in the theatre. So I remember from my first time on council, it was about how do we get this theatre. It obviously took 6 years before we got there, which wasn't too bad. That's not too long a time frame, really, to get a project, an $18 million project up. But there were some people in the community then who were very much against it. And part of their logic was, I don't want to see men in tights running around on stage.
Is that right?
And again,
feels like such an aged and sort of concept of an idea these days, doesn't it?
Well,
it makes
it does.
Like anyone still have that opinion.
And the thing is that some people thought that a theatre, in inverted commas, was for just the ballet or maybe just a philharmonic orchestra.
High class, well-to-do.
Well, something like that. And it is for those things. We've got those there as well. But just to give you an idea of some of the things that we'll see next year, we'll see the Umbilical Brothers. Now, I've seen them before at our theatre. And absolutely brilliant, very clever, very funny.
Act.
It's not exactly what you think of when you think of Men in Tights or think of philharmonic orchestras. That's right. You've also got some of the comedy festivals. And what I enjoy about those, the Melbourne Comedy Festival, the Sydney Comedy Festival, they do tours around lots of different theatres, but they'll only go to theatres where they know it's a high enough quality. And that's where we get some of these high quality productions because we've got a high quality theatre. Yeah. If I'm a production company and I can choose to go to an old civic centre hall that's a flat floor and basic facilities out the back.
Old sort of CWA town hall style setup, yes.
Yeah, that's right. If I can get to go to that or go to a modern international standard theatre like we've got here, I'm going to try and take that one every single time. So when you see those, and recently I think we had Kitty Flanagan here, her show sold out, so she put 2 shows on. So again, the 500 seats is not too bad a number in terms of the number that we can fill in a normal showing or a normal event. So you've got that whole range. So when I see people at some of these Sydney Comedy Festival, Melbourne Comedy Festival, and I talk to them, they say things like, wow, I didn't know we'd have events like this at the theatre. I thought it was going to be Men in Tights here at the theatre. Yes. Again, it's a whole range of things. So we do have ballet. We do have beautiful music, like philharmonic orchestras. We do have musical shows. But you've also got things like Dubbo Theatre Company, some unbelievable talent we have here in that. And they actually did a small segment, probably 5-minute segment of one of the shows they're doing next year. So that was.
Can you announce what are they going to be doing next year? What are they made their official announcement in regards to what their major show is going to be?
I won't go through all the shows that are coming up in the season, and these are just the season shows. Remember, there are other shows that we'll see as well throughout the year. But these are the ones that you can look at now. Go to the website and have a look, or there is a booklet that's available that's got all these shows in it as well. But just to give you a quick snapshot, the Umbilical Brothers are coming in February. In March, we've got a multicultural comedy gala, and we've got a kids show called Are We There Yet? Then also in March, we've got the Romantic Piano with concert pianist Constantine Shamray. Then we've also got in April the Wharf Review, looking for Albanese. We saw a little clip of that on the season launch, and that was very funny. Also in April, we've got Extraordinary Day, another kids show. And then in May, Boop, which is again a kids show. Later on in May, you've got John Buchan's The 39 Steps. So this is a show being put on by Dubbo Theatre Company, and that's the short piece we saw from that at the actual season launch. So it's great to see a very small snippet of that. Mr. Stink live on stage in May as well, another kids show. Then in June, one that I try and get to every year and see lots of different people there. This one is the Melbourne International Comedy Festival Road Show. So they take the best acts from the Melbourne International Comedy Show and basically take them on the road. Then in July, you've got Jesus Christ Superstar, another event being put on by Dubbo Theatre Company. In August, the Australian Ballet on tour. So we talk about Men in Tights. If you like Men in Tights, and there's nothing wrong with that at all, then you'll see the Australian Ballet there, which is fantastic to see them on stage. In August, you've also got Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. The Sunshine Club in August, that's by Hit Productions. And then Marsha Hind is still going around. She's coming out in September. Then the Monkey Bar Theatre Company are putting on Possum Magic in October. And then in November, the Sydney Commodore Festival Showcase. So that gives you a bit of an idea of some of the shows there.
It sounds like a fantastic lineup of shows.
Yeah, and again, what I love about it is someone like Dubbo Theatre Company is playing on the same stage as a professional outfit, and they're amateurs, obviously. It used to be called DATS, Dubbo Amateur Theatrical Society. It's now called DTC. But you've got those people who then lift their stand, and there's no doubt about it. I remember being in DATS when I was a kid, and I've been in DATS shows in the last few years, and the stand is definitely high.
How good was Chicago this year?
Oh, fantastic. Amazing. That's right. So you've got some of those things where everything lifts to suit that, but you've also got then the ability for school students to be on this professional stage and to lift their standard. At Stedford, Stedford's booked out for 3 weeks next year, for basically from the beginning of June through till about the 23rd of June. You've got the Stedford on there, and again, a lot of those acts, a lot of those performances, dancing, that sort of thing, is all on that major stage.
Right now, you've got all the dance companies are putting on all their Christmas concerts. And
exactly right.
Every
and
weekend, that's
all
happening.
those parents and grandparents are there watching their
God,
kids on stage.
Yes.
But again, as a 3-year-old, you're on this international standard stage dancing away with the bright lights on you. So it is fantastic. So have a look at the subscription season. Subscribe or buy some tickets to some of those shows. I just think it's great to have that asset right here in the centre of our community. And again, the cost of going to a show here compared to going to a show in Sydney, the transport, the accommodation, but even the ticket price is usually half what you would pay in Sydney. So it's a huge advantage for our residents across the board.
It really is a wonderful experience. Now, I see here, Matt, that during the week you actually attended the retirement function for the Volunteer Rescue Association Commissioner, Mark Gibson. Now, I think Mark has put in 50 years. 50 years of service.
50 years.
Just thinking about that. 50 years of service to the one organisation.
As a volunteer.
That's right. It's not even a paid job. That's a volunteer. What an incredible achievement. So, look, talk us through. I know you were there, so you must know a little bit here about Mr. Gibson in regards to what he has achieved with this. He
has achieved a lot. And 50 years as a VRA volunteer. The last 10 years as the commissioner, VRA Commissioner. Now, what's been really fascinating during that time is there's been a whole huge amount of change. And the VRA has had to change their structure completely. The VRA got some significant funding, and this is an announcement that goes back to about 2019. They were given a significant amount of funding on the basis that they changed their structure, basically lifted it to a more professional structure, became a company limited by guarantee, just basically put in place a professional structure that you would expect to see. Now, that involved a lot of change, and obviously people resist change. So some people obviously were against that. There were some interesting discussions and battles through that process, but they were given 4 years to make that change. But Mark really led that change, and within 2 years they had all the pieces in place to make that change. To give you an idea of the significance of Mark's contribution, not only did we see the Minister, so the Honourable Steph Cook MP, Minister for Emergency Services and Resilience, and Minister for Flood Recovery, she was there and spoke very passionately about the work that she'd seen Mark do. But basically every emergency service was represented there, and they formed a Guard of Honour as Mark both walked and drove down the middle of that Guard of Honour.
Thing to experience,
So you had the Rural Fire Service, you had SES, you had the police, all these different emergency services. And what I reflected on when I was talking to Mark, what I reflected on is I looked around the room and I said, if I was going to have an emergency, a disaster, an accident, then I can't think of many better places to have it than right here.
Is that right?
Because I looked around the number of outfits, the professionalism that we had in the room, and the number of people that are prepared to help, both paid and volunteers. And I tip my hat to those people because it's a pretty tough job. You think about the VRA, you go out there to a car accident, for example, and you're going to find some terrible scenes sometimes. You're volunteering to put yourself in that situation and just help out. That to me is an incredible sign of an incredible human being. To do it for 50 years.
It's amazing.
It is amazing. And one of the things that was certainly recognised there was not just the contribution of Mark, but his wife, his children, his grandchildren, because as his wife said, and I spoke to her briefly, as she said, it wasn't unusual. We're sitting around the dinner table. How you going, Mark? Have a nice day. And the phone would ring, and then she wouldn't see Mark again until the next day.
Is that right?
Because you can't really choose when a disaster happens, when an emergency happens. And Mark was there on call, ready to go, ready to facilitate, ready to, in the early days, ready to just be out there on the ground, but in the later times, just ready to organise things. But Mark, congratulations to Mark, an incredible achievement. But the thing is, there are lots of Marks out there. Mark was a special version of a volunteer, but there are lots of those volunteers out there, lots of those people doing things. But just in that area where you're putting your life at risk, Rural Fire Service, you're putting your life at risk, you're going out trying to help other people in those incredible scenes. So really, I suppose from my perspective, on behalf of the community, thank you to Mark. Congratulations to the great work you did, but also thank you to all those other people involved in those similar services and those similar ones where they're really just giving of themselves and sometimes risking their own lives to help us out.
That's wonderful. To Mr. Gibson, enjoy your retirement. You deserve it. Now, last week we mentioned the amounts given to the community organisations here in Dubbo. Now, during the week, you actually had the pleasure of doing the cheque presentation, so that must have been a pretty special little moment. I think there is, in your role, there's a lot of the committee meetings and all those sort of things, but you do get these wonderful little moments, I'm sure, where you get to see the smiles on the faces. And, these are the sort of people who are out there in the community. We just talked about Mark Gibson and what he gives. So many of these groups are also volunteer-based. And so to get council to give a bit of financial support for these groups, it must put a bit of a smile on your face, Matt.
There are some really tough jobs you do as mayor, some really demanding jobs you do as mayor, and there's some really fun jobs you do as mayor. And this is one of the fun ones, handing out some cheques. So we handed out $123,103.69.
Oh, well done.
Of your money.
Yes.
It's not my money, it's the community's money.
I'm happy for you to give that. That's okay.
Good. And that went to 21 different organisations in our community. And again, what I do, I started this probably a few months back. No, it would have been, I don't think I did it back when the last time I was mayor. I was trying to remember if I did it. I think I came up with the first cheque presentations I did when I came back as mayor. And what I used to do in the past is I used to talk about each of those organisations, about the contribution they were making, and then hand over a cheque to them. And I thought, well, the people that know much better than I do about what they do, and that's these groups themselves. So what I've started doing is I put the asset on them and I say, well, we've got organisation ABC here and they're about to pick up this cheque for X dollars. Now, can you give us a 30-second synopsis of what you do or what you do with this money? And some people don't love standing in front of a group and talking to them.
No, it's not easy for some, especially when they're very humble, probably volunteers in the background, yeah.
You're right. And the thing that I've always found with these, though, is they're so passionate about what they do, they are happy to talk about what they do. So I did the same with these cheque presentations during the week. Each organisation came up and you've got a group of people there from all these organisations. They're very supportive of one of their fellow organisations. So they're very keen to hear about this different organisation. And so they'll talk about it and most of them telling the story about how they'll use that money. And we mentioned it last week, what they do with the small amounts of money we give them. Some of these organisations were getting $499.99 was one particular one, but $500, $1,000, a couple of $1,000. And then what we hear that they do with that, because they're using the power of volunteers, it's quite incredible. So the amount of money is, in relative terms, quite small. The impact for the community is quite large. And even the event fund, there's various funds that we give it into. Might be support community organisations, it might be support events. Some of these events are going to draw 5,000 people to Dubbo, and we might have given them $1,000. So what they'll inject into our economy for a very small contribution from council is significant. So congratulations to all those organisations. I really did enjoy sitting there listening to each one as I got them up and handed them a cheque and just heard about their story. And sometimes I asked them a couple of extra questions to clarify it a bit more. But all those other organisations, at the end of it all, when there's a little bit of food at the side to have a snack on and keep them there for a bit longer, I could just see these different organisations asking about different things that each of them do. So you can just see
their own little way of networking, isn't it?
Well,
really?
That's right. Yeah. And I can just see some of those groups saying, oh, well, you do that. Well, we do that. We could tie in these two things together.
Link it up.
Various things are happening there. So congratulations to all those organisations. And again, on behalf of the community, you do fantastic work. Please keep doing that fantastic work.
Well done to all. You're the ones that very much keep our community going. Now, Matt, obviously we've just had the Dubbo Day Awards. Now, I always sort of think it's very important after you've had any major event, it's always important to do a bit of a debrief afterwards just to see if there's any areas we can improve on, what went well, what didn't go so well. So during the week there's a bit of a debrief in regards to what I'm sure was a very successful day, but are there any changes you're looking at wanting to make to this?
It's actually interesting you've asked me about that one, and you don't always ask me about some of the internal meetings I have. Normally the questions you ask me about external things, but it's actually quite a relevant question you've asked there. And again, there are lots of internal meetings you have with various staff members, other councillors, all those sort of things, which again, I don't normally worry about discussing at length because it's probably not that exciting for people. But I thought this one was actually quite interesting you've asked me about here, because any event takes a huge amount of planning. And if we pick on the Dubbo Day Awards as an example, you've got a community committee that is the Dubbo Day Committee. And the first thing they'll do is they'll look at the process that we did the previous year. Then we'll look at the award ceremony, when it's going to be held, how it's going to be organised, just the basics of going through organising an event. Sure, we've got all this history of previous ones, but you think about, have things changed? So COVID was a perfect example. Things had to change during COVID to accommodate the whole range of restrictions that we had there with COVID. So you look at all those plans, then you look at the nomination form for the awards. Does it still look right? Any change we need to make, what things have changed since then, right? Get that out there, advertise that out there. Then you get another meeting when you've got all those award nominations that come in to judge those, do the final meeting for the actual award ceremony itself. And then finally, after all that, you get to have the award ceremony, which is fantastic, very exciting. Lots of people with happy smiles on their face. And then exactly as you said, it's important after any event to have a debrief. And we like to do that fairly soon after the event because that's when it's fresh.
Does this apply for most events you do as council, or is this just sort of selected ones?
No, I would say every event that we do, every recurring event. If it was a one-off event, you may not do a debrief, but every recurring event, absolutely, you always do that debrief. And then you discuss how things went, what things could we have gotten better, should we change things for next year, is everything okay, just fine-tuning it all the time. And again, we have that community committee that sits around to talk about these various things and talk about their feedback on the day. And so really from this one in particular, we thought the day was fantastic. We love the idea of getting the former councillors back. That hasn't happened for a number of years now, but the former councillors back to hand out some of those awards. The committee thought that went really well. Just the idea of we used to have it more or less like a lecture hall style seating. That changed a few years ago with COVID, and they kept that change where now it's round tables, and then you've got essentially your family members sitting with you around one table. That was brought in for COVID, but it seemed to work quite well. We've got your family group together, so that was decided to keep that going in the future. The food, we did some individual grazing boxes because that was a COVID overhang or hangover as well. But it was probably decided that next year we could go back to a grazing table or maybe just grazing tables around the room. So just a few little minor changes there as we change with our restrictions and as we change with the numbers that come out to events again, because it's still a challenge to get people out to an event.
Yes.
People are still a little bit COVID aware, getting people out to an event.
Hesitancy still within the community.
I think there is COVID hesitancy. I like that. I'll steal that one. So I think there is a bit of that.
I'll charge you later for it. Right?
Thanks. And then again, we want more people to come out and look at these wonderful community advocates we've got. So those sort of things, again, sometimes people turn up to an event and just go, oh, yep, here I am, and everything should be right. Or there'll be one little thing that's not perfect and then they'll complain about that. But they don't think about the process that's gone on. And again, you're trying to accommodate an event for lots of people with lots of different requirements, lots of different needs. So having all that put in place and getting it right, organising an event is very difficult, but well done to our team who do a lot of organising of those events.
And it's a great sort of thing too, from the point of view of council, and to sort of to see for our listeners to see there is actually there's a very structured way that council rolls, and I suggest also the fact with the debrief. The debriefs are so important for setting you up then for next year. So you literally are, for every event, it's a 12-month planning period because you go from one straight into the debrief to help you out then for your planning for your next event, 12 months down the track.
Yeah, that's right. And we've got those notes, obviously, that when the committee first starts meeting next year, and there'll be a date already scheduled in with that first meeting approximately around a certain date for that first meeting next year, they'll pull up the notes from this year because you've forgotten about it from 8 months previous, for example, and you might say, right, what do we do? Oh, last year, that's right. Remember we said about this. Right, we'll go and make that change and we'll modify that, and away you go. So
it's a good reminder for all of us to do the debriefs. We all sort of tend to not necessarily always do that.
You're right. It is a good thing, and that's the important thing to do is as soon as possible after the event, give it a few days, let things settle down, and then go through that process.
Absolutely. During the week, you sounds like you've had the pleasure of being a keynote speaker at Aspire, partnering with the future. This is an event that's been organised as a collaboration of the 3 independent Dubbo schools. So I'm assuming that's the Christian School, MAGS and the Central West Academy. So how'd the day go, mate? That sounds like a really interesting sort of a day.
It was actually. Yeah, I was really impressed with it. And I was actually in Sydney the night before, so I was on a 7 o'clock flight back to Dubbo to get back in time.
Just another quiet day for you, Matt, from the sound of things.
That's right. And you can't be tired or off your game when you've got 150 Year 7 and Year 8 students in front of you.
I can vouch for that for you, don't worry.
That's right. They'll pick up any little flaw, any little misstep that you make. So what I like about talking to students, and we've mentioned it before, is they're the future, but they're already living in the future that they see. When you talk to people that are a bit older and you've got to change what's happening, people are resistant to change. These students are already at that change. And one of the things that I talked about, I actually did a bit of a talk about critical thinking and the process about thinking critically, because the jobs that they will have when they get out in the workforce, some of them won't exist at the moment. So you might say as a teacher, oh, well, you can't give the skills those kids need for those jobs because we don't know what the jobs will be. On the contrary, there's this whole process now with the 6 C's. And
talk me through it. What are the 6 C's? What's that?
Oh, it's a very good question. Actually, there's a few different versions of the 6 C's. The 6 C's that I generally think about in this new education paradigm are critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, communication, character, and culture. And I have sometimes seen a few different versions of those, but they seem to be the most common 6 in those C's that are there. And it is about arming children for tomorrow and about arming children for whatever is thrown at them, whatever the world gives us, and all those changes in occupations and changes that we know are coming up. One of the things that I often talk about with groups of students is critical thinking, because that's a skill that you can have regardless of your job. So it doesn't matter about what your job you're doing, you can have that idea that you can think critically about it. Things like communication, incredibly important. I'm not talking about communication on a mobile phone. I'm talking about communication and working out how to communicate with other people via whatever method that might be. It might be via a video conference call or a phone call or face-to-face, but it's about communication and connectivity. We see so much collaboration using connectivity now. It makes it so much easier to get jobs done from wherever you might be in the world. So I think students, like I talk to, have got it. They've got the idea of the future. They know where we've got to be. They accept that, and it's just the norm. But what I actually kind of almost don't realise some of these things until I start talking about them out loud, but the opportunities that we've got here. And so what I was talking to them about a lot was what Dubbo is going to see over the next 5 to 10 years' time. And I start getting a bit excited about it as I talk about it, because there are so many opportunities. And what some people see as a problem, other people see as an opportunity. And I see exactly the same thing here, that sometimes people might say, oh no, this climate change thing is a problem, or the new economy, the new renewable economy is a problem. But what I think about here in particular is that gives us an incredible opportunity. We are in a renewable energy zone.
Yes.
We've got already some projects that have been built around Wellington, solar farms, wind farms. So what opportunities does that present for us? What things can we do to take advantage of that? And that's what I really talked about to this group of students. And the teachers talked to me afterwards and said that was fantastic. That echoed some things they've been talking about in the classroom. But as you would know, sometimes it takes an external person to say the same thing you've been saying.
Absolutely. Yeah,
That's right,
I've been telling you that for 20 years. But Mr. Dickerson came in. He told me about it. Yes, okay. Well, no, he's very good.
And that's right. Sometimes that's it. So that was great that it nailed it from that perspective. But what was also great was there were a number of stalls set up around the RSL club where the students then had a program of a time frame where they'd go to the various stalls.
Yep.
So
like a little expo type setup.
Exactly right, yep.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoyed that, because I went around and talked to some of those different stalls and just got an idea of what they saw as opportunities and the things that they saw there. So I don't want to pick on too many individual stall holders, but for example, Amazon Web Services was there.
Oh,
fantastic. Really? People came up from Sydney, worked for Amazon, and they were trying to get the students to think about a career with them or something similar. And when I spoke to them, they said that one of the things they found is when they talked to university students, it was almost too late. They'd already set their path forward, and it might not have been a path that suited Amazon. Talking to them when they're in year 7 and year 8 gets them thinking about it, so then they start to choose the right subjects in year 11 and 12 to then go into university to then be of use. Yes. So Amazon's thinking about this. What will we need in 8-10 years' time? Yes. So you saw things like that. I talked about the School of Rural Health, the University of Sydney School of Rural Health, and the fact that you used to be able to do the last 2 years of your medical degree here in Dubbo. From this year, the first year was the first 4 years, so the first year of year 1 for the 4-year degree. So you can now, if you want to be a doctor here in Dubbo, you can do it while you're here in Dubbo. So what a great opportunity for these kids.
Absolutely.
Things like the Australian Strategic Minerals, the Toongai rare earth mine that will come on soon. Alkane was there as another type of mine that's not a coal mine, but a mine. I think Alkane do a very good job in terms of looking after the environment while they're doing their mining job as best they possibly can. So all these different opportunities there. Dubbo Regional Council had a stand there, of course. Yep. I even saw Narromine Shire Council there with a stand.
Oh, good on them.
Again, just talking about these careers and the opportunities that you might have in a whole range. And just what I was really impressed with as I walked around was just the variety. There are so many things. It's so exciting to be a young person at the moment. There are so many things that you could do. There are so many opportunities out there. But the great part about it is you could realise so many of those opportunities from right here. You don't need to
you
go
don't have
to
to
New
go to the
York
big
or
smoke
London.
anymore. We are enough of the big smoke right here to have these opportunities.
That's right. But even if there are some of those things that might be in some of those bigger areas, the fact that we've now worked out we can do remote collaboration, remote communication, it means that you can achieve so many of those things without having to go away from here. So that, to me, again, I get excited about it now, thinking about these opportunities. Yeah. To be in year 7 and 8 now, wow, how exciting would that be?
Haven't things changed? Matt, this is a great little one to talk about, I'd suggest. The CWA high tea on Saturday afternoon. Now, maybe some people sitting out there listening, why are we talking about the CWA high tea on a Saturday afternoon? What's the relevance in regards to it? But I think there's actually something fairly exciting happened here last weekend and involves a centenary. So elaborate further for me.
The CWA started, would you believe, in June 1922.
There you go.
So
with
that
the
was
figures
Dubbo.
again. That's
that was
very
the
impressive.
Dubbo Branch. Now, CWA here in Australia only started in April 1922.
So wait. So it started here in Australia in April. When what was the figure again? 1922.
Yep.
Yet it then came to Dubbo in June.
Yeah, so June, the Dubbo
Wow.
Branch opened
So
in June.
it's almost like we're one of the originals. That's
Absolutely
it.
right. So it's pretty impressive. And you
That
can
is
imagine
impressive.
then it wasn't as easy as a quick search on the internet and suddenly you find something and go, well, might open that branch
it's a
as well.
horse-drawn cart sort of stuff. So the message probably took the time.
It probably took 2 months to come
that's
out
it,
to Dubbo.
absolutely.
But that's pretty impressive. Now, the CWA has obviously been involved in a whole range of things over the years. The war efforts they put in. They've actually been great advocates for different things in our community and have affected some social change. It's not just about some cakes you might buy out the front of a CWA hall.
No, not at all.
So they've been a real contributor to all of these communities. But I was blown away when I'd heard that it was a centenary this year, but the fact that the Dubbo Branch was also celebrating 100 years. So the Macquarie Group, which has basically got 14 branches on it, that goes from Coonamble to Mumble, Stewarttown sort of area.
Yep.
And basically that group had the celebration on Saturday afternoon for the 100-year anniversary
Isn't that fantastic?
celebration, for the state and also for the Dubbo Branch. I thought that was pretty nice, and it's great to go along to those things, and you just get to hear some of the wonderful stories, some of the bits and pieces you'll hear from the involvement from various people, but also the relevance going forward. And some people do question various organisations whether they're relevant, whether Rotary might be relevant or whether Lions might be relevant, all these things going forward. But the CWA, I guarantee, we'll see a 200-year celebration with the CWA and beyond. Fantastic organisation and really great again.
Yes.
We're talking about volunteers today, but really great group of volunteers again that do some fantastic work.
But aren't they just a great example, I suggest, of the fact, just the humble nature of people in our community about how they just sort of go about their business and doing things. You mentioned a number of great groups there. Now, these people just sort of, they'll meet their regular meetings during the week. They plan these extraordinary events, really, and it's all volunteer-based. They raise this wonderful money. They just keep the foundations together for our country communities, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. And you are actually, I think that's spot on. It keeps the foundation together. And one of the things that I always enjoy about regional areas versus the city is that you do get that much closer linkage, and you get that linkage because you've got these various groups that are doing things and they are very much community focused. So it is exciting to see CWA being part of our community for 100 years. Crookwell was the first branch in April 1922.
Crookwell, okay.
Crookwell, and then, again in Dubbo in June 22. So,
Well, congratulations to all of those involved, and well done on 100 years, and may you get to 200. Now, Matt, we've spoken a little bit over the course of the last couple of weeks in regards to renewable energy and how you mentioned even on today's program already the fact that we are now very much a renewable energy zone here. Now, during the week, there was a meeting in Mudgee which involved the Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone Community Reference Group. Now, that is a mouthful. To slow that down to get through that one, I tell you. I don't know if I could even work out an acronym for that. So talk me through it. How did that go?
So we are in the Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone, and it encompasses 3 different local government areas. We've got Dubbo Regional Council, we've got Warrumbungle Shire Council, which is effectively Coonabarabran, it's the main centre there, and you've got Mid-Western Regional Council, which is mainly Mudgee. Those 3, the Renewable Energy Zone is touching all 3 of those LGAs. And when the government's rolling out some projects sometimes, they like to have feedback from the community. They like to have some sort of reference group. There are various projects. It's compulsory as part of that project. Now, part of the Renewable Energy Zone, the whole idea is that you've got an organisation called Energy Co, and their job is to basically build better or higher level transmission lines out to the renewable energy zone, because obviously we'll be generating a huge amount of energy just around the Wellington area alone. Once the projects are kind of up and running in the next, say, 5 years, we'll be providing about power for about 30% of the homes in this state. Now,
That's
30%.
an extraordinary figure.
It is.
Really?
It is. 30% of the homes in the state aren't located around Wellington.
No.
So obviously it's got to get that power from there somewhere else.
Yeah.
So that's where Energy Co is building these new transmission lines, building new transformers,
Getting all the
substations.
infrastructure in place, so to speak.
Correct. And the idea here is that they'll be building that so that proponents who want to build solar farms, wind farms, can have the certainty that they can make the investment in these zones, knowing they'll be able to produce the power and then be able to get it back onto the grid. So the same as they would have had to do that when they had a coal-fired power station, for example. Great, we're going to produce power there. We need to get it out to where it needs to go. It's the same concept. So that's all good in terms of getting the power there. The projects that we see already around Wellington, technically they're not part of the Renewable Energy Zone. They were there before the Renewable Energy Zone was actually considered and contemplated. They built there because there was a substation there and it had convenient sun or convenient wind. So it was built predating that, but then obviously when the government looked where they should locate these zones, that was a logical place to put it because it had the right components of wind and sun, and there was already some projects that were being built there. So the community reference group, the idea of these is that you put together some various people. So there were local government reps. So I've just become the Dubbo Regional Council local government rep. There were reps there from Mudgee, from Coonabarabran, from those two council areas. And then there were community people, so farmers that might be being impacted, for example, various community groups, and some of the generators, some of the people that will be actually building the wind turbines, some of the people that will be building the solar farms, they're there as well. So it's a whole mixture of everyone there.
A lot of the main players are all in the one room together.
All together. So there are probably about 20 people in the room. This meeting was held in Mudgee in particular. So it was really just a discussion about the progress. We got a presentation from Energy Co about the various steps that they're taking, where they're up to with those various steps, because even though it's the government building all of this, they've still got to go through the same regulatory processes. You can imagine planning a major transmission line. You've got to go through people's farms. You've got to make sure you've got easements there. You've got to make sure that they've got access to those. There's going to be some compensation paid to those farmers. So all these things, that's just to get the power out here. And then obviously the rest of it in terms of the wind and the solar and the batteries that might be built as part of that.
Yeah. Did you ever get the opportunity during the course of these meetings, I know we've talked about this before, about the financial compensation for the areas? Having these major players here who are actually setting this up, do you get the chance to talk to them at any great length about what type of financial compensation can be then brought back into these communities?
Certainly it's one of the areas of discussion.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily, you don't sit down and say it's going to be $5 per megawatt per year that's going to be paid. It doesn't get down to the nitty-gritty detail of that. What it does do, it talks about the broader concepts. And one of the issues that we've certainly talked about, and I've actually had this conversation with the Premier, that at the moment it comes down to some negotiation, whether it be between a landholder and Energy Co or a landholder and the proponent putting something on their bit of land, or it might be between council and that proponent or council and Energy Co. So it ends up with all these individual negotiations. And of course, there's all these non-disclosure agreements that are signed. So every negotiation is confidential. Every farmer's told not to discuss it with their fellow farmer because it breaches the NDA if they do that. So it all becomes a bit secret squirrel.
Yeah.
And certainly one of the things that we did talk about this week was it would be much better if there was a formula in place that everyone understood, and this was the way the calculation was done. Now, there might be some reason to vary slightly above or below that formula based on some certain variables, but just put some rules in place, put some basic policies in place and say, this is how much it's going to be, but if you can prove that your land is more productive than that, you might get a bit extra, or if the land isn't quite as good as that, you might get paid a bit less.
Sounds like a common sense approach, to be honest.
It would be nice because so much time is spent on the negotiation process, and that's where I find that people get their most angst, their most annoyance, the most frustration and the most time wasted is when they have to go through these negotiations and try and get something that they consider to be a fair and reasonable outcome for themselves. The company paying it wants to pay as little as possible. The person receiving it wants to get as much as possible. There's got to be somewhere in the middle to meet. But surely there's been enough of these proposals put together now that surely there'd be some way to say, here's a basis from all the previous negotiations, here's a starting point, go from there.
Does the state government play like an arbitration sort of role in this, in the sense that is this the group meant to be reporting back to, and that they then turn around and say, okay, well, this is going to be the outcome based on what you guys are presenting at these meetings? Yeah,
it's not really an arbitration process they play. The state government might have, for example, a consent authority process. So these often would be state significant developments. So there's a certain process they go through. And for example, you've got to be able to show that you've got permission from a landholder to put whatever project you need to put on their land. They don't say, and you must pay X dollars per megawatt or X dollars per metres or kilometres of transmission lines that might be on their property, a whole different way, around of ways to measure these things, obviously. So it just means that you've got to have had a negotiation that's been a successful outcome. So that means it's whatever. you two do. In other words, the
So it's
landholder
literally
and the company.
left up to the councils and the private enterprises that are coming in. You guys have to sort of nut this out. Is
Well,
that,
not the councils. If I was putting in a
sorry,
wind
okay.
farm, I go and negotiate. If you own some land and I want to put a wind farm on your land, I've got to get to the stage where I've got permission to put it on your land.
Yeah.
Then when I go forward with my proposal to put in my application to develop this, I need to be able to show that the landholder is happy for me to put that particular development on their land. Obviously, there's no point doing it if you're not going to give me permission to put it on your land. But then from a community benefits fund, from some negotiation with councils, if it's a wind farm, you have to show that you've had some negotiations and come to some agreement with the council. Now, we could disagree with it as a council,
Yep.
but the wind farm proponent could say, well, we've suggested this much. The council said no, but this is our suggestion. This is where we're headed, and that's as much as we're prepared to pay. And they might just get it to go through because we can't say no. The state government, as the consent authority, would say no.
Okay.
If it was a solar farm, there's no requirement whatsoever to have any of those negotiations with the council for any community benefits fund. You've still got to get permission to put it on some land, but there's no requirement at all. So I don't understand why no requirement on solar. Yes, there's a requirement on wind. But again, when you put that application in, you just have to demonstrate that you've taken the steps, but the dollar value is not part of that application process.
Okay. Well, changing course absolutely completely from that last point of discussion, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. There's my little poor interpretation. I think that was Bing Crosby or someone. But anyway, going on to it, the Christmas lights are now officially up there on Macquarie Street. So how exciting is this? It's December. It's the start of December. You know, the sales have been on, the Black Friday sales. Everyone's getting a bit excited about it all. So I always love this time of year, Matt. I don't know if are you a Christmas person, Matt?
I do like Christmas. I must admit, it always sneaks up on me, and then
Yes.
before I know it, it's Christmas Day. But it is nice. It's probably more the family. I don't really care that much about the presents, and I'm impossible to buy for because I've got the gadgets that I want already.
Well,
So
you are a tech man, and you will be a hard man to talk for and buy for, I just imagine.
yeah,
So,
the kids always tell me that, but I don't really care. I don't care if I get no presents. It's really just about that time to actually stop, take a breath, and relax for at least a day, maybe a couple of days even.
You get 4 hours sleep a night rather than 3 now.
That's right. That's it. So that is, I suppose, part of that whole process around Christmas. It's just about that family time together. And I think it's funny that people do seem to be nicer to each other at Christmas, and you feel like saying, well, why
You
don't
can't
we
help
just
but
do
be
this?
nice. The Christmas carols are playing, and the Christmas trees are up, and all these sort of fun things.
But why can't we be like that all the year? That's kind of
nice, wouldn't it?
my point.
Hey,
Yeah, everyone's very
absolutely.
nice and sweet at Christmas time, and then it comes 1st of January and they're back
There's
to
like
their old self.
a growl again. There we go.
Right. So I think it's nice, but the Christmas lights. So we had a nice little event on Friday night where we turned on the Christmas lights at the tree at the Rotunda. But as part of that, we also formally announced our local heroes.
Yeah.
And down Macquarie Street now, if you look at the flags that are flying, we've got a number of faces up there.
Wonderful.
And we had this process where we basically had some nominations and chose people that are out there. It does seem to be very focused on volunteers today, but people out there in our community doing some great volunteering work, doing fantastic work in our community. And so we chose some of those, and then their faces are up on the flags
Isn't
down
that a
Macquarie
lovely
Street.
gesture?
Yeah,
It's
it
such
was.
a lovely gesture.
Yeah, so we had some of those local heroes come along and help turn the lights on. It's pretty hard work, turning lights on a Christmas tree. So
I'd imagine we could have individually, don't you? Is that right?
well, we did do a little virtual turn on where we had the group of local heroes and myself and one of my fellow councillors. We stood there and we did abracadabra Shazam, and that was the magic word to make the lights turn on. So the kids there were very impressed with that.
Oh, wow. There you go. So you're all magicians now as well.
Exactly
Oh,
right.
very impressive.
Yeah, so it's nice to see the lights on there at Rotunda. We had an incident many years ago where there was a bit of vandalism on that tree. So that was pretty disappointing for a Christmas tree to be vandalised.
I don't understand why anyone would do that. But anyway.
No, and I'm just letting people know out there at the moment, we do have CCTV down Macquarie Street.
Okay.
And at this time of year, we do make sure there's at least one of those cameras that's focused pretty much on the tree.
On the tree. So anyone out there with any of those negative, grinchy thoughts, get away from it. That's
Exactly right. Yep. So anyway, it's Christmas time. It's coming up to Christmas. So fantastic.
it. Oh, Merry Christmas to all coming up. All right, Matt, we're moving on now, of course, to the concluding part of the today's show, and it's time now for your Limerick. So what have you got for us this week, Matt?
Well, I can't help but do it Limerick about the Christmas tree. Surely with
Oh,
the
well,
lights
it
being
stands
turned
to
on.
reason.
That's right. The Christmas tree, I thought that'd be the obvious thing to do a Limerick on. So it goes like this. We turned on the lights on our tree for all of the region to see. When they come to shop or bring in their crop, it will put smiles on faces, I guarantee.
It's perfect, Matt. Well done. The old Christmas. It is coming up, and I can't wait to sort of see the end results of what you're going to get this year for Christmas. I hope your family looks after you, at least for one little techie device this year.
Yeah, thank you.
That'd be nice.
You just tell them, will you?
I will. I'll pass the message on. Well, folks, I can't wait to see the new Serengeti experience at the zoo, and I'm sure you're in the exact same situation as well. And congratulations again to VRA Commissioner Mark Gibson on 50 years of outstanding service. Congratulations again, Mark. I wish you all the very best with your retirement. And of course, when you get the chance, take a trip down Macquarie Street and have a look at those wonderful Christmas lights displays that are set up there in that beautiful Christmas tree. Well, folks, that just wraps it up for this week of the Mayoral Memo. Until next week, take care.
Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickinson from Dubbo Regional Council.